Dermot and Dave's Mind Yourself Now.
Mind yourself now.
Mind yourself now.
Mind yourself now.
On Today FM.
Hello everybody, I'm Dermot and that's Dave, and you're very welcome to our Mind Yourself Now panel. We're helping you get your 2022 off to the best possible start.
Yeah, we're going to be joined by our expert panel who are here to answer all of your brilliant questions on how you can best take the time to really mind yourself this year. And that's why it's the Mind Yourself Now panel.
You'll have heard them on the show over the months, and now they're back to answer your questions. Dr. Sabina Brennan is a health psychologist, neuroscientist, author of the best-selling books Beating Brain Fog and 100 Days to a Younger Brain, and she's host of the fabulous Super Brain podcast.
Hi, Sabina.
Hi, how you doing?
Great, thanks for joining us. Professor David Burke is consultant cardiologist. He's director of cardiology at the Beacon Hospital and director of the Beacon Hospital Research Institute. He specialises in interventional cardiology, cardiac disease prevention, and lots more. David, how are you?
Hi guys, how are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks for joining us today. We've also got Lauren Guilfoyle. She's a chartered physiotherapist who has worked with the likes of the Tipperary Senior Camogie Squad, the Tip Senior Hurlers, and Ireland's basketballers. How are you, Lauren? Lovely to have you today.
Thanks, guys.
And Elsa Jones is a nutritional therapist and author of the best-selling book Goodbye Sugar. She's 12 years of experience working with clients via one-to-one sessions and through her nutrition and weight management courses in person and online. Elsa, good morning and welcome.
Hello, hi guys.
Lauren, the Tipperary Hurlers just lost to Kerry. I think they need you back in there. Something's gone very wrong.
Possibly now, but it's early days though. It's still January. We'll give them time.
Yeah, well, look, let's tear into your questions because everybody's been sending them in. You've been emailing them to dermotanddavid@todayfm.com, and thank you for that. Kicking one off for you, Professor David Burke. I often experience a missing heartbeat. I could be just watching telly and feel a pump in my chest. It's like getting an electric shock and it returns to normal straight away. It doesn't hurt when I exercise and I'm a relatively fit person. Is this normal or should I be worried about it? I've no real family history of heart problems.
A good question, and it's a common one actually, and the extra heartbeats are incredibly common. We all have about 100,000 heartbeats in a day, and most people have somewhere between 50 and a couple of hundred of extras. And a lot of us don't feel them at all. You're more likely to feel them when you're sitting watching TV or lying in bed because your natural heart rate will slow down and those extras will come in then. Caffeine, alcohol, fatigue, viral illnesses will all kick them off. And hydration actually plays a huge role in it. If you're a little bit dried out, you'll find you probably get a few more. And there's usually nothing to them. Most people feel a bit of a thump, a bit of a flutter, a bit of a drop. That's pretty standard stuff. And provided it's not prolonged, and the part of the question there in terms of exercise, if they settle out with exercise, that's a good sign. If they go away as you exercise and your heart rate picks up, that's usually very little to it. So yeah, absolutely. Most of us get those every day. Most people don't feel them. Sometimes they'll come and go, and very little to it.
Okay, good stuff. Sabina, one of the topics that we often talk about is chronic pain, and it affects so many people around Ireland. And the question here is, does chronic pain impact on the brain? Which is an interesting one because obviously it's a very tough thing to deal with, but we think of it physically being tough to deal with. But what about for the brain?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between pain and like your cognitive function and how your brain works is quite complex. Not in the least in a way because pain is associated with things like stress, fatigue, anxiety, depression. So there's multiple factors that would be impacting on how well your brain functions. But brain pain is commonly associated with a disruption to how your brain works. And that's because your pain processes and your thinking processes often use the same networks in your brain. That's one thing. So it actually may become that it's a resource issue, that they're competing for available resources in the brain. And pain by its very nature demands your attention. It does that because it serves a protective purpose. Ordinarily, you need to stop using the injured arm or hand or whatever, draw your attention to something being wrong. But with prolonged pain that's chronic, which usually means pain that persists for 3 to 6 months, even after the instigator or the cause of the pain has been rectified, that's kind of got a very different feel to it. And it seems to just demand your attention. And attention requires a huge amount of brain resources. So again, sort of a resource issue that, focusing on the pain is taking away resources that you could be using to focus on other activities. And actually mindfulness, being present, doing other things to distract you from the pain can actually really work, because it's our perception of pain, how we perceive pain, and thinking about it too often is what, makes it bigger in our lives. So distracting yourself from pain by doing something that you enjoy even can help to kind of give you relief. But there's a lot we have to learn about the relationship between pain and the brain yet. We don't fully understand it.
Elsa, someone says, I know it's said that the Mediterranean diet is one of the best, but should we really be sticking to what is naturally produced in our region? So, for example, should we be focusing on eating spuds and fish and mutton and kebabs? Okay, maybe not kebabs, but should we be eating what's more, from our surroundings, or should we be mimicking the diet of someone who could live thousands of miles away?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. To be honest with you, I think we can do both. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Mediterranean diet. Probably helps that I have a Spanish mother, so I grew up with it. But I really am a big believer in the Mediterranean diet. However, when you think about it, the Mediterranean diet is predominantly made up of plenty of fresh fruit, vegetables, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, fish, olive oil. And we, have a lot of these things naturally available and naturally grown in this country too. So I personally think that we can do a lot of the elements of the Mediterranean diet in Ireland. I mean, we're an island, so we have all this fish readily available to us. And I think, yes, there is a lot to be said for eating locally, eating what's in season. It tends to be fresher, it tends to taste better. And also the nutritional value content can actually be higher in locally produced foods. So, if obviously you have access to local farmers markets, even sort of local fruit and vegetable shops that haven't, done these long transit times from different countries, it's better. But obviously, even in supermarkets, you can usually find, in many cases, the food that is actually grown in Ireland. So keep an eye out in the supermarket. But personally, I do the Mediterranean diet in Ireland and try and keep it as seasonal and local as I can.
Brilliant. Lauren, someone says, I think I have tennis elbow. I've been working at home since 2020 at a computer desk, and for the past few weeks I've had a very sore elbow, a burning pain going down my arm, and I'm finding it hard to lift things like the kettle. I thought the break at Christmas would help, but it hasn't improved. I've ordered a mouse mat support, but do I just need to go get physio?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Tennis elbow is an issue with the wrist extensor. So all the muscles that basically extend our wrist that start on the outside of our elbow, typically called tennis elbow because tennis players hold their wrist in that position. So yeah, it possibly could be tennis elbow. I think there is a need to maybe just have a little bit more of a specific diagnosis or kind of an assured diagnosis, just because that will guide treatment strategies. When it comes to the burning type sensation, that might be neurological in source. So that could be something to do with the nerves that pass around the elbow. So we do have a number of nerves, the median nerve, the ulnar nerve, the radial nerve that pass in that area. That could be a separate issue. It's very hard to tell, I suppose, without a full assessment. But I do think it's important that we do go see a physio. I think even the use of terminology there, go for a physio and go to see a physio, is probably important, because physio is all about empowering someone to go home and kind of self-manage their own symptoms. So when it comes to tennis elbow, it's a lot of graded resistance exercise that needs to be very individualized to the person. So this is where the likes of Dr. Google and whatnot can definitely kind of steer you in the right direction, but you really know what's going to be effective for you and to kind of get you out of this uncomfortable issue that you are finding yourself in. It's important to kind of work on an individualized basis. So I do think it would be really helpful to go see your local chartered physio. It'll be a course of resistance training that's very easily done at home, but just to get a guide as to how to do it, how many reps to do, how often to do it, and some subtle changes to make to the setup at home, the desk that you might have, or even to kind of allay some of the fears that you might have around that burning sensation, some very subtle changes that you can make. So I definitely would recommend that person to seek out their local physio, for maybe 1-2 sessions might be all is needed, just to learn about what's happening and then how to self-manage that at home.
Brilliant.
I think I have tennis elbow, Dave.
Yeah?
Yeah, I keep serving drinks to myself. Oh, hey!
I thought I did the bad jokes.
David, David, there's one for you. I have a resting heartbeat of around 57 or 58. But lately I'm getting racing heartbeat about 100 for no reason. I also have an autoimmune disease. What could this be? Should I be worried? It's maybe possibly we should be asking about resting heart rates generally and when they become a concern.
I suppose resting heart rate, we're all very attuned now to heart rate with all of our gadgets. And I have, like we said before, I have a Whoop and I have an Apple Watch. So I'm a big believer in the wearables. And most people now who come to see me will be able to tell you exactly what the resting heart rate is, which is very, very helpful. And like we've said before, I think this type of fitness wearable will play a great role for me in the longer run because it allows us to watch people continuously. When people say I have a resting heart rate of whatever it is, normal is anywhere between ballpark 50 and 80 as you sit there. That's pretty standard. So there's quite a wide variation. In olden days, I suppose people said, oh, if you're very, very fit, you tend to run low. That's not necessarily the case. Lance Armstrong used to have a resting heart rate of about 32 beats a minute. He's probably not the best example, but however.
He may have had some assistance in that.
He said, I need a new name. But I suppose 57, 58, perfectly normal, perfectly fine. If the 100 beats a minute that that person is talking about, I suppose if they're feeling that, that's different. So if it's showing up on your gadget, that's fine. There's probably not a whole lot to it. An awful lot of what this hinges on is whether or not you feel that. And if you're sitting there and you feel your heart rate get that fast, there could be something to it. Again, caffeine, alcohol, stress, viral illnesses all play into it. Hydration hugely plays into it. And I suppose back to Sabina's piece in terms of pain, that can play into it hugely. So if you have an autoimmune condition or any medical condition, it can certainly change around your heart rate. It again depends on whether or not you're consistently in the 50s and then jumping or consistently in the hundreds. That's obviously very different too. It's usually a sign that there might be something to it. But by and large, unless you're feeling it and unless it's consistent, there's not a whole lot to it. The wearables are great, but I think because everybody can now focus more heavily on the numbers, it really focuses attention onto that. And usually there's not a whole lot to it.
Good, that's good to hear. It's Dermot and Dave, and we're joined by our Mind Yourself Now panel of experts, kicking off the new year on the right foot. We're getting through some of the questions you've been sending in by email and on Instagram. And Sabina, we'll go to you about this. Somebody says, I was prescribed anxiety medication recently, and it's kind of tying in Professor Burke as well, because it also says, what impact would this have on my brain and on my heart? So Sabina, we'll go to you first in terms of the impact of anxiety medication on the brain.
So first of all, there's lots of medications impact on the brain. Any medication that operates on the central nervous system has the capacity to interfere with your cognitive functioning, your mental processes. And that includes things like painkillers, antihistamines, antidepressants, as well as your listener, their question around anti-anxiety medications. So, even if you were to read the side effects on your medication list, it will say that the side effects can include things like sleepiness, fatigue, and slowing of mental functioning. So it can actually impact on it. And if you're sleepy and fatigued, you're not going to be able to be sharp and focused and concentrate. Now, I think it's really, really very, very important that if you've been prescribed medication, never to stop taking that medication without discussing it with your prescribing doctor. And if you feel that you're taking a medication that's impacting on your capacity to carry out your activities of daily living, your job, to concentrate, even your relationships, speak to your prescribing doctor about it. There could perhaps be alternatives that may not have the same impact. Secondly, I think with something like anxiety, there's this balance that when you have anxiety, that too can impair your cognitive functioning and your ability to make decisions and to think straight. So I would like to think of anti-anxiety medication as something to get you back to a point where you can start engaging in behavioral methods, such as, cognitive behavioral therapy or relaxation methods, or engaging in things like yoga to help you to manage your anxiety. And so get you back to a place where you don't have a medication that's impacting on your cognitive functioning, nor do you have anxiety or, poorly managed anxiety or stress that is impairing your cognition as well. So it's a journey. And in short, the answer is yes. But discuss it further with your prescribing doctor.
And what about the heart then, Professor Burke?
I suppose the problem with anxiety is that a lot of the symptoms that you can get along with it tend to tie in with what you might see from a heart point of view. So I'd see a lot of people with palpitations, tightness in the chest, short of breath, and you sort of sit with people and you think it does sound like they might well be anxious, but of course you have to be careful and sure. The medication itself doesn't tend to have a negative effect from a heart point of view. I suppose if anything should help settle down those symptoms. Most of what I do would be, I suppose, put people through simple testing to provide them with a reassurance. And I think that reassurance in and of itself tends to help both the anxiety and any symptoms that might come along with it.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, here's one for you. When I drive to work in the morning, one of my pet peeves are runners running at my car in the cycle lane on the wrong side of the road. And obviously they're doing this because they want to run on the road because they're afraid that running on the footpath will be more damaging to their knees. And I always think, if you're that worried about your joints, go run down in the football pitch or something. Does it matter where we run? Like, is running on beside the footpath actually helping your cartilage in your knees? Or, where should people be running if they're that worried?
I hadn't a clue where that was going when you were starting that question.
It's okay, neither did I.
So no, there is no inherently bad surface to run on. And it's definitely a pet peeve of mine when I read people saying, don't run on the roads, don't run on the roads. When we think about different surfaces, it causes a different amplitude of force to be transmitted to the body. So if you take, for example, jumping on a bouncy castle versus jumping on the road. One is a little bit harsher on the body, but it's not inherently bad. Our bodies are amazing at adapting to the conditions that we place them under. So if I want to run the marathon tomorrow, I'm probably not going to be able to do it. But if I train consistently, my body will adapt to whatever load is required to run a marathon. And the same principle applies for running on the road versus running on grass. And this is something that we would have seen throughout lockdown. And I definitely would have been questioned numerous times about shin splints and the likes, because of field-based athletes now having to run on the roads. So no, it's not inherently bad, but it is important that you, if you are changing surface, to change with a gradual approach. So if you're new to running on the roads, you're used to running on grass, it just means that your knees and your ankles are being exposed to a higher load, which they're able to take. It just might take a little bit of time to adapt to those surfaces. The same can be said for people that run on the roads and then they're suddenly in West Kerry for the weekend and they're now running on sand and their calves are in bits. It's a different surface. The body has to basically work a little bit differently. But once it's a gradual approach, and we often talk about gradual approaches like when you're increasing the distance of a run, which when we look at it kind of cumulatively is an increase in load. So something like changing the surface can also change that cumulative load. So if you are changing surface, you might just have to drop the distance of the run, the speed at which you're running, maybe have a little look at the shoes that you're wearing, like Converse versus a pair of Asics. One absorbs some of that force a bit better than the other. So no, to answer your question, there's no bad surface, just we have to be smart about what we're doing and not asking our body to do anything that it's not capable of, but under the right conditions, the right guidance, it will be able to do it if we take a gradual approach.
Yeah, makes sense, because in fairness, their knees won't be in great shape when I plow into them in my car.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Maybe it's worth just going on the footpath.
Elsa, a question for you. Someone says, I'm a 45-year-old male with plenty of aches and pains and a family history of arthritis. Is there anything I can take supplements-wise to support joints and bones?
Okay. So the likes of glucosamine with chondroitin can be beneficial in terms of promoting cartilage and joint health. And we don't know what type of arthritis is in his family. Possibly, I'm assuming osteoarthritis. I would recommend sort of an anti-inflammatory style diet. So really a natural whole food based diet, plenty of unprocessed foods, fresh fruit, vegetables, not too many, sugary foods, too much alcohol, too many, trans fats, that kind of thing. And for some people who have arthritic pain, they actually do better avoiding the nightshade foods. So the likes of tomatoes, peppers, aubergine, even potatoes, even tea is actually another one too, which can aggravate arthritic symptoms. So I would suggest this person maybe keep a food symptom diary and just record everything that he eats and drinks during the day and takes note of symptoms just to see if any of his diet can actually impact his pain symptoms.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
One for you, David. I've recently been diagnosed with myocarditis. Can you explain what that means for me and what I can do to get help?
Yep. So myocarditis, as elaborate as it sounds, is an inflammation of the heart muscle. It's often viral, and that's why we're hearing an awful lot about it at the moment. And certainly COVID has proven to be quite a common cause of it. As dramatic as it sounds, there's not often a huge amount to it. Some people certainly will get a rip-roaring myocarditis. That's slightly different. That can end you up in the hospital. But most people who get it get a very small amount. To take a step back from that for a second, nowadays, one of the heart tests we can do for people is a cardiac MRI. So it's a standard MRI scan, and we're able to focus it on your heart. And we do those scans for lots and lots of different reasons. And in actual fact, an awful lot of the time, the scan will look completely normal, with the exception of a tagline on the end of the report saying, looks like he had some previous myocarditis. So scans like that are allowing us to see that actually it's incredibly common, and we pick it up all of the time, and most people are not aware of it. Because of all the headlines surrounding COVID, I suppose most people now are aware of myocarditis, and it just certainly has become more common. My analogy, I suppose, is to say, in the same way you can get a viral illness and a red raw throat that's itchy and scratchy and irritating, but it comes and it goes, you can get a viral illness and get some inflammation and scratch, I suppose, on the heart muscle. And again, it does tend to come and go. There's no usual long-term effect to it. If it's uncomfortable and most people just get a bit of an achy, persistent chest discomfort, the best treatment is an anti-inflammatory. So standard over-the-counter ibuprofen or Nurofen is what we would give people. Very, very rarely it'll progress and kind of persist. And then I suppose some people do end up in hospital with it, but the vast majority don't. And I suppose nowadays we're labeling an awful lot of people with quote unquote myocarditis. But when people say, do I need help? No, it is definitely something that causes an awful lot of anxiety, but by and large, you just sit tight. And again, like the scratchy throat, it will go away and have no lasting effect.
Good stuff. It's Dermot and Dave. We're here with our Mind Yourself Now panel of experts to answer your questions on everything from diet to exercise, your heart and your brain. And Dr. Sabina Brennan, we come to you with a brain question here. It's interesting. Dr. David there just mentioned the COVID thing, and people are aware of certain side effects and things from vaccines and all the rest. But this person says, I had COVID last year. I'm not sure if I'm suffering from long COVID or if I should be worried about my memory. There is a history of dementia in my family, and I'm terrified that I'll miss some of the symptoms by putting it down to long COVID. Is there a difference, or is there anything I can do to improve my memory post-illness?
Okay, so yes, brain fog is a common long-term lingering symptom of COVID, and a lot of people are experiencing it. And I think a lot of people are also experiencing it just from the pandemic, because poor sleep, stress, and loss of routine can all impact on your ability, to remember, to learn, to concentrate, to focus, all those things. I do think, and I'm glad this question was put forward, I think it's very, very important to draw a distinction between brain fog and dementia. They are very, very distinct. Brain fog is an umbrella term to describe a collection of symptoms that can often be the consequence of a viral illness or we've heard a lot about autoimmune diseases here, underlying conditions, side effect of medication, hormonal imbalance, and certain lifestyle factors that I've touched on, including nutritional deficiency, poor sleep, and also lack of exercise even. In contrast, dementia is a neurodegenerative disease. It most commonly affects older people in later life. A lot of people are aware of it who are maybe in midlife. They're maybe looking after a parent who's living with dementia, and be concerned about the fact that it runs in their family. My own mother lived with dementia and died of dementia. So I'm very aware of that feeling. There is a very slight There is a very small genetic element there's a genetic element to dementia, but it's small in comparison to the lifestyle factors that increase your risk of developing dementia. And in fact, 40% of all cases of dementia are attributable to modifiable lifestyle factors. And very interestingly, with David here, many of those are related to your cardiovascular health. If you have a healthy heart, it's the first great step to a healthy brain. Your brain depends on a healthy cardiovascular system to function well. So things like type 2 diabetes, midlife high blood pressure, obesity, lack of physical exercise, they'll all increase your risk of developing dementia. And I think what people forget when there is a familial element to a condition is the amount of lifestyle that plays a role, and a lot of families adopt similar lifestyles. So they may be putting more emphasis on a genetic heritage when actually it's lifestyle factors, which is really good news. You can change them up. So don't really be overly concerned that it may be dementia. The difference really is with dementia, often the person who has it isn't really aware of the symptoms, and it's those around them who notice them more. So it would be things like being confused or lost in a place that you are ordinarily familiar with, having trouble knowing, time or day. Now, I know we all had a bit of that during the pandemic. And then another really common symptom of dementia would be repeating the same story or asking the same question over and over again without realizing it. And none of those are symptoms of brain fog that's associated with long COVID.
Interesting, because another one says, my attention span has never been good, but it's only getting worse. Is there, and actually then it just trails off into nowhere.
They are terrible.
I couldn't resist.
One for you, Lauren. I'm working on the road all day. I know my posture is terrible. My shoulders feel like they're slouching constantly, and I get a pain between my shoulder blades occasionally. Should I look at getting some support for my back?
In a short answer, no. Any of these posture correctors are pretty much a fad, a money-making opportunity. Posture isn't a fixed thing. It's not something that I have one way compared to you and the next person. And there's no inherently bad posture. You can see a trend coming here with my answers. Posture is pretty much dynamic. It changes. If we're sitting at a desk, we're standing, we're in the gym, wherever it might be. And a lot of it is actually habitual. And this is where I suppose in like recent years, the way life has progressed, we're all looking for a quick fix. We're all looking for something to fix our posture as opposed to kind of actively working on it ourselves. So when it comes to posture, it's unfortunately something that we have to kind of think about, consider, and actively try and change. So in the case of this listener, it's a case of can he or she be a little bit more cognizant of how they are standing, maybe getting some advice as to kind of ways to stand that might be a little bit more comfortable. And this is where it comes back to posture isn't there's no like one correct posture that's pain-free versus this posture that's painful. The best posture to be in is one that's constantly changing. And when we're in one particular position, we're just loading the same structures a lot more than other structures. So when it comes to kind of a rounded upper back posture, the muscles that lie between our scapulars, our shoulder blades are probably going to be in a longer position. It's harder for them to actually work when they're in a more stretched position, and it just means that they have to use a bit more energy to be in that position all day. So we can help them out by standing up a little bit taller, but moving a little bit more, not being in one certain position. And also, if we're standing in one position, our heart rate might drop a little bit. So if we can just move and kind of get more oxygenated blood to those muscles, we're going to help them out a little bit more as well. So I suppose in a short answer, no, a posture corrector isn't really going to help you in the long term. It might give you some symptomatic short relief, but unfortunately posture is habitual. I often tell clients of mine to even put a reminder on their phone, or every single time they pass or they see themselves in a mirror, or some sort of reminder to just kind of check, well, what position am I in? Have I been in this position for a long time? Can I just move out of it briefly? And that's, I suppose, kind of how we can correct posture.
Well, I think Dave and I must have been rappers in a former life, because we both discovered that we drive leaning into the middle.
Totally. Yeah. Leaning, left arm on the armrest.
Rolling.
Elsa, a question for you about binging. Someone says, I found myself binging in the evening. I'm being so good during the day, but once the kids are in bed, I cannot stop eating. I'm worried it's becoming a problem. Is this the sort of thing I should speak to my doctor about, or can I just tweak my diet first?
I'm really glad that somebody came forward with this question, because binge eating is so incredibly common, yet it's not something that gets talked about very much because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes with it. So fair play to this person for asking this question. So I think absolutely there's a lot of targeted help out there in terms of therapists who actually specialize in binge eating. So, if it's not something you feel you can do alone, there are group and one-to-one support services for binge eating. From my perspective, my advice would be for now, maybe to try two things. The first thing would be to change the environment where the binge eating occurs. So for example, she talks about kind of putting kids to bed in the evening time. So most likely she's doing her binge eating, let's say in front of the couch, watching TV at night in the living room. So I think even just for a week initially, remove yourself from that evening routine. So when the kids are gone to bed, maybe go have a bath, maybe make your bedroom your new kind of sanctuary, read a book, do one of Dermot's meditations, phone a friend, whatever it is, or even if you want to watch something on an iPad, but take yourself out of the environment that you're usually in. And even if you can break that habit for a week, it could give you this sort of sense of control of, you know what, actually, I can do this. The second thing that's really important is to try and commit to eating more mindfully, because a lot of the time, binge eating is done mindlessly because we don't want to think about it and we don't want to acknowledge what we're doing. So if you commit to actually only ever eating sitting down and with no distractions. So what I mean by distractions are not to eat when you're watching TV, when you're scrolling on your phone, when you're, on your laptop responding to an email. People are fine, like eating with your loved ones is fine. But what you want to do is eat sitting down, food in front of you, no distractions. And what that does is it really forces you to acknowledge what you're eating, how much you're actually eating. And because you're not distracted, it allows you to really sort of tune into your natural feelings of fullness. And you'll probably find that you're much better able to feel naturally full and satisfied if you eat mindfully. So give those things a go. But if you feel you're still struggling, then absolutely seek out the help of a therapist, I would say.
Now we know what we can do, Dave. We can just put the biscuits on a plate, get a knife, eat them with a knife and fork with our families.
You don't already eat your biscuits with a knife and fork? I've actually been very mindfully eating the last of the mince pies in my house because I love mince pies and they only come into season, obviously in November, and I get them and I bought them in bulk.
Into season.
Yeah.
You're not growing them in the
They are.
vegetable
They're only coming and now they're running out. So every night when I'm having one with a cup of tea, I'm going, there are only 5 mince pies left. Appreciate the mince pie because soon it will be gone and you'll be on to a Mr. Kipling apple pie and it's just not the same. I'm sorry. Look, one final
You're just
question.
undoing all of Elsa's amazing advice there, sanctioning Mr. Kipling's.
One final question to each of you. And it's the same question, so we just ask it to each of you and you can answer then in turn. But if you could give everybody who's watching and listening one piece of advice to take with them into 2022 from your expert field, what would it be? Sabina, maybe we'll start with you.
Oh, mine is just make more time for fun, laughter, and joy in your life. Schedule it for at some point every single day, an hour, half an hour. And I'm not talking about sitting down watching television, something that really brings you that sense of joy and have fun. And, if you have to, pre-record Dermot and Dave and listen in. And
There you go.
3 hours a day of guaranteed fun.
Prescriptions with just Dermot and Dave on it. Here, do that for a few weeks. How about you, David? If you could just give one nugget of advice.
I would say aim very high, but start small. Small steps, just incremental steps. If you're like me, on the 31st of December every year, I decide I'm going to run 5K every day for 100 days. And 3 days in, say, I don't have time for that. So I think the trick, in terms of what I see, people, they come up with very grand plans, very grand schemes, but it just doesn't persist. So I think if you start with small taps and just tap away at it, even if you said, I'm going to do something tiny every month and gradually build towards it. I suppose specifically from a heart point of view, exactly as we said, you can't change your family history, which is important, but you can change the other pieces in terms of lifestyle. So from my side, it's blood pressure, cholesterol. If you're diabetic, look after that, and just don't smoke. That plays massively into it. Sometimes when I see young people with heart attacks, you don't even have to ask them if they're smokers. You already know that they are. So that nowadays should be pretty obvious.
Okay, Elsa.
I would say just ask yourself what you want more of in 2022.
Mince
so,
pies.
for example, besides mince pies, like, for example, people often will just say, I want to get healthy and these kind of abstract things. So, just define it for yourself. So let's say, for example, I want to eat more healthy. Why? Okay, because I really want to have more energy. Right. Why? What are the benefits of you having more energy? Okay, when I have more energy, write it down. I have more energy to do fun activities with the kids. I'm more likely to meet up with my friends for a walk. I can stay on top of the house with ease. I'm in better form with my family. Write it down, only a few lines, stick it on the inside of your wardrobe. So every day you're reminded of why you want to eat healthy and it sticks in your mind. That's what I'd say.
Very good.
And Lauren, your
I
words
think
of wisdom?
David and Elsa really kind of cover what I was going to cover, but I suppose as like a practical piece of advice, work on building habits before we kind of work on more specific, let's say, physical activity goals. If you've never ran before, maybe just make the habit of leaving your house 3 times a day to go for a walk or a run or whatever it might be. Focused, like, let your first goal be, let's create a habit here, and then we can get a little bit more specific in terms of if that's tennis or running or the gym or whatever it might be. Start at the very, very foundation, and that would just be the habit itself.
Brilliant.
Wonderful. Guys, thank you so much. Dr. Sabina Brennan, Professor David Burke, Lauren Guilfoyle and Elsa Jones. Thank you so much for taking part in our Mind Yourself Now panel of experts, kicking off the year on a really positive note.
Yeah.
And wishing you all a very happy new year.
We'll be doing loads more of this. So if you have any questions, email them into Dermot and Dave at todayfm.com, and we will have the guys back on, and more experts indeed, every single week with Mind Yourself Now on Today FM. Thanks.
Dermot and Dave's Mind Yourself Now.
Mind yourself now.
Mind yourself now.
Mind yourself now.
On Today FM.